Hello everyone, and welcome back to Real Life of Animals. Today's episode takes us deep into the heart of the rainforest, a place where sunlight barely touches the ground, where every sound echoes with ancient mystery, and where the line between known wildlife and the unexplained becomes dangerously thin. Over the next 8 stories, we'll explore some of the most unsettling real-life gorilla encounters ever documented. These aren't legends or exaggerated campfire tales. These accounts come from researchers, trackers, and survivors who witnessed behaviors and events that science still struggles to explain. From hidden territories untouched by humans to sudden disappearances, territorial warnings, and moments where instinct alone determined life or death. Each story reminds us that the rainforest is not just alive, it is watching. So settle in, turn up the volume, and prepare yourself. What you're about to hear is raw, real, and unforgettable. Welcome to Real Life of Animal, where nature shows its true face. Story 1. The shadows beneath the canopy. Deep inside the Congo Basin, where the canopy forms a ceiling so dense that daylight barely filters through, a field research team set up a temporary camp near a riverbank. The team, led by primatologist Dr. Lena Whitmore, had been tracking a troop of western lowland gorillas for several weeks. They had already grown used to the forest's constant humming, cicadas, dripping leaves, distant thunder rumbling somewhere beyond. But on the 18th night, something changed. The forest went quiet, an almost suffocating silence settling over their camp like a warning. Lena had been documenting nest-building behavior earlier that day and noticed something that disturbed her. Several nests appeared abandoned halfway through construction, as if the troop had suddenly stopped their efforts and moved on in a hurry. Broken branches and displaced foliage indicated stress. Gorillas rarely wasted the energy of nest building unless something threatened them. She had mentioned it during dinner, but the rest of the crew dismissed it as the troop reacting to a nearby leopard. The Congo forest was full of predators after all. Nothing unusual. But later that night, just after 2 a.m., the forest finally declared that something was wrong. It began with a low vibration in the ground, subtle, almost imperceptible, like the earth was exhaling through its roots. Campbell, the team's geologist, felt it through the floor of the tent and sat up straight, listening. Then came the sound of branches snapping. Heavy ones, not the brittle crack of small animals moving through the brush. These breaks were slow, deliberate, and close. Campbell stepped outside his tent with a flashlight, but his beam dissolved into mist before it reached the trees. Lena woke up moments later to the sound of a deep, resonant breathing that did not belong to any person. She crawled to the tent entrance, unzipped it halfway, and froze. Standing just beyond the dim lantern glow were 2 silhouettes, massive, unmoving, watching. Their shapes were unmistakable. Adult gorillas, but not the troop they were studying. These were larger, bulkier, with heavy-set shoulders and a posture that seemed wrong, almost too upright. Every instinct in Lena's body told her not to make a sound. Then, without warning, one of them rushed forward. The force of the charge was so powerful that the air seemed to compress. The creature stopped just inches from the lantern, its breath steaming in the cold night air. It didn't roar or beat its chest. Instead, it stared directly at Lena as if studying her the same way she had studied its species for years. Its eyes reflected a faint reddish glow, not from aggression but from the lantern's flame. And in that reflection she saw an intelligence she had never encountered in any primate before. Campbell and two others stepped out of their tents, attempting to remain still. No one dared shine a flashlight directly at the animals. Sudden light could provoke aggression. The second gorilla shifted behind the first, sniffing the air, grumbling low and deep. The ground vibrations intensified, and one by one more shapes appeared between the trees. 3, 4, possibly 5. A splinter group, rogue males, or something else entirely. The gorillas did not follow typical troop behavior. They lacked females, lacked young, and moved in a coordinated pattern that suggested deliberate strategy. As they circled the camp, their movements were silent except for the occasional thud of a massive fist settling on the earth. One brushed against a tent pole, causing it to buckle slightly, but it made no move to attack. They were herding the humans, testing boundaries, determining whether they were a threat. Lena whispered to the team to stay inside the camp perimeter and avoid eye contact. But even as she said it, she realized the gorillas weren't reacting to them. They were reacting to something else in the forest. A sound echoed from deeper within the trees, a shrill, guttural cry unlike any known animal vocalization. Instantly, every gorilla froze. Their behavior shifted from cautious to tense. The largest male stepped forward, exhaled sharply, and beat his chest once, not as a warning to the humans, but as a signal to his own group. Then chaos erupted. The troops surged past the camp, charging toward the sound. Branches snapped violently as their enormous bodies tore through undergrowth. The researchers stumbled back, scrambling to avoid being knocked over. The forest shook with the thunder of their movement, and then, just as quickly as they appeared, they were gone, vanishing into the dark. The team stood in shock, trying to process what had happened. Lena insisted they pack up immediately. The gorillas were fleeing something, and whatever it was, humans were no safer than animals. But before they could dismantle the camp, the forest cried out again. This time closer. The sound was sharp, warbling, and human-like enough to twist the stomach. Not a gorilla. Not any primate they knew. The researchers grabbed what they could carry and moved toward the river, hoping to reach their small outpost raft. The trees around them creaked as if pressured by unseen weight, leaves trembling overhead even though there was no wind. Something heavy moved parallel to them just beyond sight. When they reached the riverbank, Campbell turned to look behind them and gasped. Across the clearing, barely visible between layers of fog, a pair of glowing eyes hovered above the ground. Then another, and another. Not red reflections like the gorillas. These were a pale, unnatural yellow. The team backed onto the raft, pushing off desperately as the water carried them into the current. As they drifted away, Lena saw a silhouette step out onto the riverbank. It was large, man-shaped, but too broad, too heavy, too distorted. It watched them until distance swallowed its outline. The team survived, though most never returned to field work. Lena wrote about the incident in private notes but never submitted it for publication. No scientific journal would accept something so impossible. Yet witnesses across the Congo Basin have reported similar encounters for decades. Roving male guerrilla groups acting as if fleeing something unseen. Strange calls echoing through the canopy and silhouettes that did not match any known species. Whatever chased that troop through the forest wasn't documented in any biology text. And the researchers swear to this day, they weren't the ones the gorillas were afraid of. Story 2. The drums of the Eastern Lowlands. Deep inside the eastern lowlands of the Democratic Republic of Congo, beyond the last reachable village and several days' travel past the final navigable road, a documentary team led by wildlife filmmaker Marco Santos set up base along an abandoned logging route. Their goal was simple: record rare footage of silverback social dynamics for a conservation project. The region was known for its dense undergrowth, its steep ridge lines, and the haunting sound the locals referred to only as the night drums. Most foreign visitors assumed the name was a metaphor: rumbling thunder, shifting trees, or echoing waterfalls. But the villagers insisted otherwise. The sound was real, rhythmic, and always preceded by sightings of enormous gorillas moving in strange, coordinated patterns. No elder could agree on the origin. Some said it was territorial communication between splintered troops. Others called it a warning. A few whispered that it wasn't the gorillas who made the sound at all, but something that followed them. Marco didn't believe in superstition. He had filmed lions sleeping beneath sandstorms, wolves crossing frozen rivers, and elephants migrating through burning grasslands. Nothing scared him anymore, but the local guide still refused to accompany the team past the old logging road. They said the forest changed there, that the air felt heavier, like something watched from between the buttress roots. 3 days into filming, the team encountered their first sign that the villagers were right. They found a freshly abandoned gorilla nest site. Not unusual on its own, gorillas relocate regularly. But these nests were clawed apart violently. The leaves were torn, not eaten. The branches snapped at unnatural angles, and deep trenches were pressed into the soil as though something massive had dug its knuckles into the earth while moving fast. Marco photographed everything, but the unease in his stomach grew heavier the longer he analyzed the scene. That night, around 11 p.m., the drums began. At first, they resembled distant thunder, low, spaced out, almost like the pulse of the ground itself. But then the rhythm formed: 2 beats. Pause, 3 beats, long pause, 2 beats again, not random, repeating. Echoing through the canopy as though some enormous body were striking the ground. The crew crawled from their tents, listening in confusion. Their Congolese cook, Kendi, whispered, "It means they are running. The gorillas. They flee when it starts." As if responding on cue, tree limbs snapped in the distance. Shapes, large and many, moved in the dark. Not toward the camp, but past it, charging through the understory with desperate, frantic energy. The ground trembled as multiple gorillas barreled downhill, their vocalizations filled with panic. No chest beating, no displays, no aggression, just fear. Marco grabbed his camera and pointed it toward the noise, capturing only the blur of monstrous bodies passing through narrow shafts of moonlight. The sound of their weight was staggering, like boulders tumbling. Whatever drove gorillas to flee was not small. Then, as the last of the fleeing figures vanished into the trees, the drums stopped. Silence returned, but not for long. From the hollow beneath a massive strangler fig, a new sound rose, a low chuffing, guttural and deep, unlike any gorilla vocalization recorded. It was heavier, slower, and resonant enough that their chests vibrated. Something exhaled from the darkness, long and controlled, as if tasting the air. A shape emerged. At first, it resembled an adult gorilla, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, the torso was too narrow, the head was broader, sloping forward with thick hair matted across its shoulders like wet moss. Its eyes reflected amber when the lantern caught them. Predatory, unblinking. It stood at the edge of their camp, just beyond the lantern radius, towering over Marco's shoulder height even without fully extending its body. The crew froze, every nerve in their bodies screaming to stay silent. The creature stepped closer, its weight barely making sound despite its size. Gorillas were powerful, but never this quiet. Kendi whispered only one phrase: Makumbu Mrefu, the long spirit, something the elders mentioned but never explained. The creature crouched, sniffed the ground where the gorillas had run, then angled its head toward the researchers. Its gaze lingered on their equipment, lights, cameras, metal frames, as if recognizing none of it. For a moment, Marco thought it might leave. Then the drums began again. But this time, they came from behind the creature. 3 beats, then 2, then 3 again. The creature turned sharply, muscles rippling beneath its fur, and released a growl so low it seemed to shake the leaves. The lantern flickered. The forest erupted with movement in multiple directions, something large advancing from the slope and another circling near the riverbed. Marco realized in a sickening wave of clarity that there wasn't just one. The creature spun and dashed back into the trees, its speed shockingly fast for its size. The forest erupted in answering calls, some from gorillas fleeing deeper into the night, others from the unknown entities following them. The chaos built and built until it dissolved into the distant canopy, leaving only faint echoes. By morning, the forest was silent again. The team packed up camp and left within hours, abandoning equipment worth tens of thousands of dollars. No footage from that night was ever released publicly. Marco stored it in a private archive labeled "Do Not Publish." The only part he ever spoke about was this: the gorillas weren't fighting those things, they were running. And once you hear what they run from, you'll never think of the rainforest as peaceful again. Story 3: The Hollow Canopy Incident. In 2014, a small team of ecological researchers working for a Central African conservation program set out toward the Ngombe Rainforest, an enormous stretch of untouched green stretching across the border of the Republic of Congo and Cameroon. Their mission: document the behavior of an unusually large gorilla troop that had been reported by logging surveyors months earlier. The reports were vague and inconsistent. Some described silverbacks nearly a foot taller than average, while others swore the animals moved in strange, perfectly synchronized formations, almost like soldiers. The research leader, Dr. Elaine Mercer, didn't believe any of the exaggerations. She had spent 20 years studying primate behavior and had learned that frightened humans tended to inflate their stories. Still, something in the surveyors' voices, especially the part about a hollow canopy where all sound vanished, left her uneasy before the team even arrived. The Ngombe was different the moment they entered. Most rainforests echoed with insect droning, bird calls, distant whoops, and cackles. But this one seemed muffled, as if a thick layer of air rested between the trees. Even the crackle of branches underfoot felt strangely soft. The deeper they traveled, the more Elaine felt the unnerving pressure of being observed, not by one creature but by many at once. On their second evening, they encountered the first sign that something wasn't right. Their tracker, an experienced Mbuti guide named Jeshi, found a series of enormous fist prints in the soil, too large for any known gorilla species and spaced too far apart for even the strongest silverback. The knuckle depressions were deep enough to suggest unimaginable weight. Jeshi crouched over the marks and whispered, "This one walks on its fist, but the arms are too long. No troop leaves this pattern, only one." When Elaine asked him to elaborate, he simply stood and said, "We don't go farther today." The team set up camp before dusk. Around 9 p.m., the forest began to shift. First came the vibration, so subtle that only the metal poles of their tents caught it, trembling like tuning forks. Then the canopy above them darkened. Though there were no clouds and the moon remained bright, the air grew heavy, warm, thick with a humidity that tasted faintly metallic. Then came the silence, a true absolute silence. No insects, no wind, no distant cries. Even their breathing felt muted inside the strange bubble of air that settled around the camp. Elaine later described it as being inside a closed room whose walls we couldn't see. Jeshi's face drained of color. "It has come," he whispered. A distant cracking of branches echoed through the trees, not chaotic or random, but measured. Something large was walking in deliberate intervals. Every step sounded like it came from high above the ground, as if the creature's entire body towered above them. The team rushed to shut off their lamps, leaving only the faint glow of the moon filtering through the leaves. The cracking stopped. A low rumble, so deep it felt like a vibration more than a noise, built directly above them. Elaine's heart pounded, but she forced herself to look upward. Something enormous moved through the canopy. At first she thought it was a massive shadow, but then she saw the outline. Long arms spanning across branches thick as telephone poles, hands large enough to wrap entirely around them. Its torso was impossibly wide and covered in dense black fur that absorbed the moonlight. Its head was broad, almost rectangular, with a sloping bone ridge that cast its face into darkness. A giant ape, but not shaped like any gorilla she had ever studied. And worst of all, it made no sound as it moved. Elaine realized she wasn't breathing. No one was. The weight of silence pressed their lungs. The creature reached a branch directly above camp and stopped. Slowly it lowered its head, peering through the leaves at the humans below. The leaves barely rustled, though they should have snapped under such mass. Its eyes glowed faintly, not red, not yellow, but a lifeless, glassy white that reflected no emotion. For a full minute it watched them. Then from the distance a gorilla screamed. Not a challenge, not aggression, a scream of panic. Another screamed, then a third. A whole troop calling out in a frenzy. The giant creature lifted its head sharply, then swung its entire body through the canopy with terrifying speed. Silent, fluid, predatory. The screams intensified as the unseen animal moved toward them. Jeshi grabbed Elaine's arm. "We go, now!" The team didn't pack anything. They fled, stumbling through roots and vines, running blindly in the direction opposite the screams. The forest behind them erupted with movement, branches crashing, gorillas panicking, something huge pursuing them from above. The drums came next, not literal drums, thunderous pounding against tree trunks, echoing in a pattern that sounded almost ritualistic. As each heavy strike reverberated, the canopy above them trembled, showering leaves in their path. They ran until the sky began to lighten with dawn, collapsing at the border of a riverbank far outside their survey range. Only when the insects returned, slowly, hesitantly, did they realize they were safe. When the team finally returned to civilization, they expected disbelief. But the logging surveyors simply nodded, saying only, "You went too close to the hollow canopy. Even the gorillas avoid it." Elaine never published the footage from that night. The recordings captured nothing of the creature itself, but the silence, the tremors, and the distant screams told the story well enough. According to her, the Ngombe holds a species, or something like a species, that moves through its treetops like a shadow with weight. And whatever it is, the true gorillas fear it enough to abandon their territory entirely. Story 4. The Night of the Red Canopy Troop. Deep in the Congolese rainforest, where the tree canopy forms a thick red glow at sunset, researchers encountered one of the most unsettling gorilla incidents ever recorded. It became known among field teams as the Night of the Red Canopy Troop. The story begins when a monitoring team stationed at a remote observation post detected unusual movements near a region called Bokande Valley, a stretch of forest famous for its crimson-colored leaves that appear almost blood red under the fading light. Normally, this region was home to a peaceful troop known as the Red Canopy Gorillas, a small but stable family led by a watchful silverback named Rumo. But on this particular evening, the troop was nowhere to be seen on the thermal drones. Instead, the sensors picked up scattered erratic heat signatures, fast, disorganized, and unusually low to the ground. Something had startled the troop, and they were moving in ways no researcher had ever documented. When the team arrived on foot, the forest felt wrong. The usual symphony of insects and frogs was absent. The air was unusually cold. The red leaves above filtered the moonlight into a dark crimson hue, making the entire valley feel submerged in a faint red fog. As the team advanced, they found the first sign of trouble. Freshly torn vines and crushed saplings, as if large bodies had charged through in blind panic. Gorillas rarely move like that unless threatened by predators or internal conflict. Yet there were no signs of leopards, no broken branches indicating large carnivores, and no traces of infighting. Then they heard it. A deep trembling vibration, not a gorilla call, not an echo, but something that seemed to pulse through the ground itself. The team later described it as feeling like standing beside a huge water drum. Every time the vibration hit, the leaves above shook lightly, releasing a cascade of red fragments that fell like sparks. Moments later, the troop appeared, but not in the way anyone expected. The first figure to emerge was Rumo. Normally a composed, powerful silverback, he stumbled out of the darkness, staggering as if disoriented. His chest was marked with streaks of red leaf pigments, giving him a ghost-like appearance. He let out a short, clipped bark, an alarm signal rarely used unless a troop is under immediate threat. Behind him came several females and juveniles, all clustered tightly, eyes wide, breathing heavily. One juvenile clung to its mother's back, trembling uncontrollably. Another adolescent male had injuries on his arms, not claw marks, but abrasions from scraping against trees at high speed. Still, there was no predator. The researchers slowly backed away, giving Rumo space. But the silverback did something highly unusual. He did not confront the humans. Instead, he turned toward the deeper part of the valley and released a long, drawn-out roar. Not aggressive, defensive. That's when the researchers felt it again, the vibration. But this time it wasn't the ground. It was coming from the gorge at the center of the valley. A low-frequency hum, almost mechanical, echoing up through the forest floor. Rumo responded by slamming his fists into the earth repeatedly, each hit synchronized with the pulses. The rest of the troop huddled closer, pressing themselves against a large fallen tree for support. The team documented the moment in shock. Gorilla ethology contains no references to behavior like this. It was as if the troop had encountered a natural phenomenon entirely outside their evolutionary experience. As the vibrations intensified, a gust of cold air blew through the valley, unnaturally cold for a tropical forest night. The red canopy shook violently and thousands of leaves rained down, creating the illusion of a crimson storm. The gorillas reacted instantly. Rumo herded the troop into a tight defensive circle, placing himself at the outer edge. He growled, teeth bared, scanning the forest with frantic movements. The juveniles crouched low, covering their heads. The females vocalized short, panicked chirps. Then, just as suddenly, the vibrations stopped. Every leaf in the canopy went still. Every sound vanished. Even the wind froze. The silence was so absolute that the researchers later described it as the loudest quiet they had ever heard. Rumo lifted his head, sniffed the air, and slowly relaxed his stance. The troop remained motionless for several minutes before he finally signaled them to move. Instead of returning to their nesting grounds, they migrated out of Bokande Valley entirely, an extremely rare relocation event for a troop with such an established range. By dawn, the red canopy troop was gone. When researchers returned later that week, they found the source of the vibration. A recently opened underground fissure near the gorge, caused by shifting tectonic plates. The repeated low-frequency tremors had reverberated through the valley, creating pulses that disoriented wildlife, especially gorillas whose bodies are sensitive to deep vibrations. The threat had never been a predator. It had been the Earth itself. And so, the event became the subject of one of the most fascinating case studies in gorilla behavioral adaptation, demonstrating how these intelligent primates react when confronted with natural forces beyond their understanding. To this day, no gorilla troop has re-entered Bokande Valley at night. Story 5. The 3-day silence of Mukuba Ridge. High in the mist-covered mountains of the Central African rainforest lies a remote plateau known as Mukuba Ridge, a place so isolated that even seasoned trackers speak of it with a kind of respectful unease. The ridge is famous for its golden morning fog that settles over the treetops like a glowing veil. It is also home to one of the least studied and most elusive gorilla families ever documented. The Mukuba Ridge Group, led by an enormous scarred silverback named Daro. For years, researchers tried to establish consistent observation schedules in the area, but the terrain was unforgiving. Vertical slopes, sudden ravines, and a thick network of twisted lianas that could trap even the most experienced hiker. Because of this, the team usually relied on long-range acoustic sensors to monitor the troop's vocal activity. Gorillas communicate constantly: grunts, hoots, chest beats, feeding calls. Even when they are calm, the forest around them is alive with sound. But one morning, the ridge went silent. Not quiet, silent. No grunts, no feeding rustles, no branch snaps, no chest beats, nothing. The sensors detected zero gorilla activity in a zone that had been active every single day for 8 consecutive years. At first, the researchers thought it was a malfunction. They climbed the ridge to check the equipment, but every device was functioning perfectly. The Mukuba Ridge Troop had simply vanished from sound. That's when the team initiated a full 3-day observational search. Day 1 began with cautious optimism. The researchers hiked toward the troop's usual nesting zone, an elevated clearing surrounded by strangler fig trees. The nests from the previous night were intact, meaning the gorillas had been there recently. The leaves were still warm when touched, but the forest carried a strange tension. Not a single bird called overhead. Even the insects were unusually faint, as if the entire ridge was holding its breath. Near midday, the team found the first disturbing sign, a set of tracks leading downslope but spaced far apart, indicating the gorillas had been moving at high speed. Gorillas rarely flee unless under extreme stress, and even then they vocalize to communicate. Yet there had been no sound. As daylight faded, the silence deepened, settling around the ridge like a heavy blanket. Day 2 brought answers, just not the kind anyone expected. The team followed the direction of the tracks and eventually found a secondary nesting site in a dense pocket of forest. The nests were rushed, loosely built, and scattered chaotically, a complete departure from the gorilla's usual structure. Several nests contained clumps of shed fur. Others were covered in thick mud, as if the gorillas had rolled across the forest floor. They were stressed, afraid, moving without pattern. Then they found Daro's prints, massive, deep, and erratic. A gorilla of his size should have moved with slow, deliberate confidence, yet the depth of the prints suggested he had been running. Something had terrified the entire troop into a full-scale evacuation. What was strange was that there were no predator tracks, no evidence of leopards, crocodiles, or human presence. The mud was undisturbed except for the gorilla footprints. That afternoon, as the team collected samples, a sound finally broke through the silence. A faint, low, whooping call. But it wasn't coming from the gorillas, it came from deep within the earth. A minute-long tremor rippled through the forest floor. The trees swayed even though there was no wind. The soil vibrated so subtly that it was almost imperceptible, just enough to unsettle anyone standing on it. The team realized the truth. The ridge was experiencing underground microseismic shifts, tiny earthquakes too small to be felt directly but strong enough to disturb wildlife over a wide radius. Gorillas are extremely sensitive to vibrations. Their chest cavities, bone structures, and even nesting habits make them more aware of ground signals than humans. They must have sensed the early tremors long before any humans did, and their response was panic, flight, and silence. But the researchers still needed to find them. Day 3 began before sunrise with dense fog blanketing the ridge. Visibility was barely 2 meters. Every step felt like moving through a dream. Hours passed without any sign of the troop. The silence was so complete that even the team's breathing sounded intrusive. Then, just as the fog began to lift, a deep, resonant chest beat echoed through the ravine. 1 beat, pause, 2 beats, another pause. It was Daro. The team rushed toward the sound, climbing through thick brush until they reached a hidden clearing they had never mapped before. There, perched on a wide rocky shelf overlooking the valley, stood the entire Mukuba Ridge troop. They were alive, alert, but visibly changed. The adults stood in a defensive semicircle, bodies angled outward. The juveniles huddled behind them. Some gorillas had dusted themselves with clay, an instinctive behavior usually seen during preparation for storms or environmental threats. Daro himself was positioned at the very front, fists pressed into the ground, staring downward into the valley as if listening for something humans could not hear. Just then, another tremor rolled across the ridge, a faint rhythmic pulse. The gorillas did not panic this time, but they did not relax either. Instead, they emitted a series of short grunts among themselves, a kind of reassurance ritual gathering their troop together. Then, in a slow, united movement, they began descending the opposite side of the ridge, leaving their ancestral territory behind. The researchers followed at a distance, careful not to disturb them, documenting a rare and extraordinary sight. A complete voluntary migration, triggered not by predators or scarcity, but by the earth itself. By the end of the day, the troop had settled in a safer, lower forest zone, far from the seismic activity that had shaken their home. The silence of Mukuba Ridge slowly faded as the normal forest life returned. Birds sang again, insects resumed their buzzing. But the gorillas never went back. Their 3-day disappearance remained one of the most unusual behavioral responses ever recorded in wild gorillas. A testament to how deeply their instincts are tied to the natural rhythms of the planet, rhythms humans often fail to notice until much later. To this day, no troop has reoccupied Mukuba Ridge. Story 6. The night the forest stopped breathing, deep within the equatorial rainforest where the canopy grows so dense that daylight thins into a green twilight, lies a remote wetland sector known as Lake Maboto Basin. It is one of the most inaccessible wildlife zones in the region. No roads, no villages, and not even established research trails. The only way in or out is by boat through the labyrinth of blackwater channels that snake between towering buttress-rooted trees. It was here that a long-term field study recorded one of the most unsettling gorilla encounters ever documented. The research team consisted of 4 primatologists stationed at a floating base camp anchored along the banks. Their focus was a rare, semi-habituated gorilla group called the Bokoho family, led by a cautious silverback named Maru, known for his calm temperament and unusually slow decision-making. Unlike many gorilla leaders who assert dominance, Maru examined everything, every sound, every smell, every movement, before acting. His troop mirrored that behavior, making them incredibly predictable and easy to study. But on a humid night in late October, the forest betrayed every predictable pattern. It began shortly after sunset. The team was compiling data when the insects suddenly fell silent. The rainforest's night chorus is normally deafening. Frogs, crickets, cicadas, bats, distant bird calls. But within minutes, all sound bled away, leaving only the dull slap of water against the wooden hull of the base camp. At first, the team assumed a storm was approaching, but the air was still. No wind, no thunder, no clouds. Just silence. Then from deep within the mangroves came a low, pulsing vibration. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was felt more than heard. A slow, rhythmic thrum that seemed to rise from the roots of the forest itself. The researchers checked their equipment for engine interference, but everything was offline. One member of the team, the most experienced tracker, suddenly froze. "It's the gorillas," he whispered. "They're moving and fast." This was impossible. Gorillas do not sprint through wetlands at night. Their vision is poor in the dark, and night travel risks injury. But when the team listened closely, they could hear it. A distant crashing of vegetation, the heavy, rapid impacts of large bodies pushing through dense foliage. They grabbed their lanterns and moved onto the observation platform. That was when they saw the first pair of glowing eyes reflected in the water. Then another and another. The Bokoho family was fleeing toward the water's edge. Maru appeared first, emerging from the shadows like a black phantom. His chest was streaked with mud, his fur bristled, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. His eyes darted across the water and then upward toward the canopy, as if searching for an escape route that did not exist. Behind him, the females clutched their infants. The juveniles clustered together, trembling violently. The team backed away slowly, making space. The gorillas never approached the water voluntarily, and they certainly never came this close to humans unless something was terribly wrong. Suddenly, a deafening crack echoed through the forest. A massive branch fell from above, crashing just meters behind the troop. Several gorillas shrieked and pressed themselves into the mud. Maru spun around, eyes wide, his chest heaving as he emitted a deep, warning rumble unlike anything the observers had ever heard from him. Then came the second crack, and the third, and the fourth. But this time it wasn't branches, the trees were swaying, every single one, though the air was completely still. The team realized with growing dread that something was causing a synchronized movement of the canopy, perfectly rhythmic, perfectly timed, as if an invisible force were passing through the forest in waves. The trees bent, straightened, bent again, following a pattern no storm had ever produced. The gorillas knew it first, then the forest reacted. Humans were the last to understand. The pulsing vibration grew stronger, traveling through the soil. Water rippled across the lake despite the windless night. Birds burst from the treetops in panicked clusters. Fish leapt from the water in a desperate frenzy. Maru let out a powerful guttural roar that shook the platform. The team watched in stunned silence as he herded his entire family onto a fallen log that bridged the water to a higher patch of ground. The troop vanished into the darkness, moving with a speed and coordination no one had ever witnessed in gorillas. Moments later, the first tremor hit. A violent, body-shaking jolt rolled through the basin. The floating camp pitched sideways. Several supply crates crashed into the water. The trees groaned, some of their roots breaking free from the saturated mud. A second tremor followed immediately, stronger this time, sending shockwaves through the entire ecosystem. The night air filled with the sound of cracking wood, splashing water, and distant animal cries. For almost 15 minutes, the earth convulsed. Then everything stopped. Silence returned, deeper, heavier, more suffocating than before. When dawn finally broke, the researchers surveyed the forest with numb disbelief. Entire sections of the swamp had shifted. Mud geysers had erupted overnight. Two enormous trees had collapsed across the main channel. The earth itself had torn open in several places, exposing tangled roots and old stone formations. But the gorillas were gone. It took the team 3 full days to locate the Bokoho family. They found them nearly 5 kilometers away, far beyond their usual territory. The troop was exhausted and visibly shaken but unharmed. Maru sat in the center, covered in dry mud, staring at the researchers with a haunting intensity, as if warning them that the forest they thought they understood had deeper, older forces beneath it. The tremors were later confirmed as part of a shallow seismic swarm, a rare geological event in the region. But no scientific report was able to explain how the gorillas sensed it hours before humans felt the first vibration. To the researchers, the message was clear. The forest speaks long before it trembles, and the gorillas who live closest to its heartbeat hear it first. Story 7. The silverback at the edge of the world. There is a section of the Congolese rainforest known simply as the Break, a place where the land ruptures into a vast labyrinth of cliffs, sinkholes, and ancient volcanic fractures swallowed by vegetation. Satellite images show the terrain as a chaotic puzzle. Towering limestone ridges split open like old bone, with jagged drops disappearing into darkness. The indigenous trackers call it Okanga, meaning the place where the world split apart. It was here, on the eastern ridge of the Break, that one of the most unnerving gorilla encounters ever recorded took place. The expedition consisted of 3 wildlife surveyors, trained climbers specializing in documenting elusive primates, especially the high-altitude gorillas that rarely cross into lowland groups. Their objective was to install motion-triggered cameras along the ridge, where a mysterious lone silverback had been reported for years. Local trackers called the individual Damu, the blood-marked one, though none could explain the name clearly. Some said he carried scars shaped like claw marks. Others claimed his chest was stained by a mineral from the stone cliffs. All agreed on one thing. Damu wandered alone, far from any known gorilla territory, and he moved with an awareness that made even veteran trackers uneasy. For days, the expedition team followed faint signs, broken stems, disturbed moss, deep knuckle prints in soil. Nothing unusual. But on the 5th night, as the team camped on a narrow ledge overlooking the black chasm below, an unsettling pattern began. It started with rocks, small ones no bigger than fists, rolling off the ridge above them. At first, the team dismissed it as wind or natural erosion. But the falls became rhythmic, one rock every 30 seconds, always from the same direction, always landing within meters of their camp. Then came the breathing, not loud, not human. A deep, slow exhale from somewhere just past the tree line, a massive animal trying and failing to stay silent. The head tracker whispered, "Don't turn on the lights, he's watching." But the youngest surveyor panicked. He clicked on his headlamp and swept the beam across the ridge, and then they saw him, Damu, standing motionless at the very edge of the cliffs. He was huge, even for a silverback, his silhouette framed by the abyss behind him. His fur shimmered with streaks of gray and white dust from the limestone. His chest bore 3 long, dark scars as if something had clawed him years ago. But what froze the team was not his size or his scars. It was the way he stared. Gorillas normally avoid locking eyes for long periods. It's seen as a challenge. But Damu held their gaze with an unnatural steadiness, as if assessing them individually, measuring them, deciding something. Then with shocking speed, he vanished into the darkness. The surveyors barely slept that night. At dawn, they began ascending the ridge toward the location where Damu had stood. What they found made them stop cold. There, pressed deep into the dirt, were Damu's footprints, each print angled slightly outward, pointing not toward the forest but toward the cliff itself, as if he had walked to the very edge with no intention of turning back. And beside his prints was a trail of disturbed gravel leading down into the chasm. It looked like something massive had climbed up from below. The team continued reluctantly, documenting each sign as required. But the higher they climbed, the more they found evidence of Damu's strange boundary-walking behavior. Perfect circles of crushed vegetation, long drag marks across stone, and fresh bark gouges on trees far taller than a gorilla could normally reach. That afternoon, a storm approached, the sky bruising purple, clouds swallowing the sun. The team hurried to set the last camera on a narrow outcropping known as the precipice shelf, a stone platform only 3 meters across with a sheer drop of hundreds of feet. They anchored their ropes, secured the equipment, and were preparing to descend when a low, rolling growl rose from the cliff behind them. They spun around. Damu was there, not 20 meters away. Rain began to fall, turning the limestone slick. Lightning flashed, illuminating him in stark white beams. He stood perfectly still except for the rise and fall of his massive chest. The scar across his shoulder glistened in the rain. Then, impossibly, he began to walk toward the precipice. Not toward the team, toward the edge. Slow, deliberate steps. 1, 2, 3. The tracker shouted, "Stop, you'll fall," even knowing gorillas don't understand human speech. But Damu seemed unbothered. He reached the very lip of the cliff and peered over, scanning the darkness below. The team followed his gaze. Lightning struck again, revealing the chasm's interior. And they saw movement. Something huge shifting between the shadows far below. Not a gorilla, not a leopard, something with weight enough to displace entire patches of vegetation in one sweep. The forest canopy shivered in unnatural patterns as if reacting to the slow advance of a creature hidden beneath it. Damu roared, an earth-shaking call that echoed through the cliffs, and the thing below stopped moving. The silence that followed felt alive. The surveyors remained frozen, unsure whether to retreat or stay still. Damu lowered himself onto his knuckles, his back rising like a black mountain, still staring down into the abyss. Another flash of lightning illuminated his eyes, reflecting not fear, but defiance. Then, without warning, he slammed his fists into the cliffside. The entire ridge vibrated, rocks tumbled from the sides of the chasm. Birds erupted into the sky. The unseen creature below shifted again, but this time farther away. As if backing down, the storm intensified. Thunder ripped open the sky. Damu rose, chest heaving, and stared once more at the surveyors. His expression held something the team struggled to describe later: authority, warning, and an unmistakable intelligence. Then he turned and slipped back into the forest, disappearing between the buttress roots as if swallowed by the rain. The team immediately descended the ridge, abandoning the mission. They returned 2 days later with local trackers to retrieve their gear. When they reviewed the cliff-mounted camera, the one facing the abyss, they found only one unusual recording. At 3:17 a.m., the camera captured a massive shadow shifting deep within the chasm. No shape, no identifiable form, just movement, something vast. And for 9 full seconds, the microphone picked up low, rhythmic breathing. Not human, not gorilla, something else. The surveyors never returned to the break, and Damu, the lone silverback who patrolled the world's edge, was never seen again. Story 8. Deep within the Congolese rainforest, far beyond the tourist routes and research zones, there was an area known among local trackers as the Gray Canopy. It earned its name from the strange pallor of the trees, an ashy, washed-out color that didn't exist anywhere else in the region. According to the elders, even the animals avoided the place. No birdsong, no insects, no distant howls. Just a silence so heavy it felt like the air itself refused to move. For years, scientists dismissed the legends, until a series of unexplained disappearances started occurring along the forest's uncharted corridors. That's when wildlife biologist Dr. Leon Hart and his small field team were assigned to investigate. Their goal was simple: determine whether the vanishings were caused by poacher or by something else entirely. From the moment they entered the Gray Canopy, the forest felt wrong. Their footsteps didn't echo. Their voices seemed swallowed before the sound could fully form. Even the satellite tracker began drifting off coordinate, as though the forest was bending signals away from itself. Then they found the first sign, a set of massive knuckle prints. Gorilla undoubtedly, but deeper, heavier than any known species, too wide, too symmetrical, almost deliberate. "Silverback?" one of the assistants whispered. "No," Hart said quietly, crouching down. "Something bigger." The deeper they went, the more unnatural the findings became. Stripped bark arranged in circular patterns, vines braided together, massive footprints appearing and disappearing without any logical path. It was as if something moved in the trees and only occasionally chose to touch the ground. That night, around 2 a.m., the team woke to the sound of branches cracking slowly, rhythmically, like something enormous was circling their camp. Their lanterns flickered. The forest, already colorless, seemed to drain even further into a monochrome haze. Then they heard it, a low, resonant hum, not a growl, not a call, something almost spoken. Hart slowly lifted his camera toward the tree line and froze. Two eyes were staring back, not shining like a predator's eyes in the dark. These were dull, flat, almost human in their emptiness. They floated at a height far above any known gorilla, motionless, unblinking. The creature didn't make a sound, yet the air around the team felt compressed, vibrating with a pressure that made their ears ring. One of the assistants panicked and ran. The eyes followed. A single step, a sound like a tree being uprooted, echoed from the darkness. Then a second, then silence. Hart shouted, but the assistant's voice was swallowed by the forest's oppressive hush. When they found him 2 hours later, he was alive, but sitting upright against a tree, staring blankly ahead, covered in gray ash from head to toe. His fingernails were worn down, his throat raw, as if he had been screaming for hours. Yet he had no memory of anything. The next morning, Hart made the decision to leave, but the forest didn't want them to. The path they had marked was gone. Trees had shifted positions. Their compass spun in every direction. The canopy itself seemed to bend and twist, letting in faint light that was always behind them, never ahead. Then came the second encounter. A towering silhouette walked parallel to the group, silent, watching. Its arms were disproportionately long. Its fur wasn't black, brown, or silvered, but a dusty gray, the same color as the trees around them. It blended with the environment so perfectly it felt less like an animal and more like a part of the forest itself. When it finally moved into full view, the team froze. It was a gorilla. But not like any gorilla documented in science. Its skull was heavier, its eyes sunken and lifeless, its muscles corded like tightly wrapped vines. And when it opened its mouth, slowly, deliberately, it released a deep, resonant vibration that rattled the metal equipment in their packs. Not a roar, not a threat display, but communication, a warning. The forest responded. Leaves trembled, branches creaked. Somewhere behind them, another enormous figure stepped into view. Then another. 3 gray gorillas, each larger than the last, surrounded the team without moving a single step closer. It was their presence alone that pinned the humans in place. Hart understood. This wasn't a coincidental encounter. This was territory. Sacred territory. Slowly, he lowered his gear, raised his hands, and backed away. The gorillas did not follow, not aggressively, not curiously. They simply watched, unblinking, ensuring the humans left the gray canopy the same way they had entered. Quietly, respectfully, and without a single trace left behind. When the team finally emerged into normal rainforest, the colors returned. The birdsong resumed. The air felt lighter. But the assistant, who had been touched by the creatures, never fully recovered. He spoke of the silence, the vibration, the eyes that weren't angry, but ancient, older than the forest itself. And Dr. Hart, once a strict skeptic, filed his report with a single closing sentence. Some gorillas are not meant to be studied. Some are meant to be left alone.